the question quickly becomes, what does it entail to be a green company? And not least, what are some of the things that we are working on, and what does it take to do that? Maybe to set the scene a little bit, the fact that we are a green company, it's something that's been part of our DNA since the launch of the company. Our founder was very determined to build a company that had only EVs. He believed firmly that it may not have been the case at that time, but for in the future, this would be a requirement in the cities. It is actually something we see today, that cities around Europe are increasingly demanding that if you are operating car sharing or similar services, it has to be EV, or it has to be EV within the next coming years. We're already there, so this is something that's truly part of our organization and our DNA. And interestingly enough, this green part, if you like, as a term, is also something that that unintentionally has generated some employer branding. We see a lot of people today are very motivated by working in green companies, companies where they can help to impact society. Another part, naturally, in a green company, and especially when it comes to mobility, is our vehicles. There is an increased or bigger investment into doing this, and I think over history you see companies in general that are moving in a new direction, that were first movers in changing things. Typically, there is a big investment in the beginning. It's the same case for us. Operating EVs is a more expensive business than operating traditional cars. But I'm also fully convinced that this will change. We see a drop in EV prices. We see a better resale market, and some of these drivers that are influencing the assets of our company. But also a much bigger uptake in the market. If we go back, I joined the company in mid 2017. And back then, driving EVs was still sort of, I would say, almost only for hippies. Having EVs was something only very few people did. Today, you see it everywhere. It's a natural part of our society to have EVs, to use EVs, whether you own one or you're using a shared one. So things are definitely changing, and it's benefiting green mobility, but I think it's also benefiting society. Then I think being a green company is something that you have to do throughout the organization, throughout whatever you do. We can't just say, okay, we operate EVs, this is nice thing, and everyone can see that. But we have to do it everywhere. So for us, it's down to how we have our lights here at the office. When we moved into this office we are in currently, we challenged our landlord, saying we want to have all the light bulbs changed into something that is low energy uses and better for the environment. Same went for waste sorting. And interesting enough, this was not something that they could accommodate well, we could handle it from our office, but then we have to challenge the landlord on how do we do it down in the courtyard where the trash goes. So there are a lot of small things that you continuously have to push for. Then if we and these are, while they may not impact our CO2 emissions on a bigger scale, they are still impacting the way we operate a business, and it's part of our culture. So we will challenge this. But obviously, if we go into the main business, this is where we can really see the impact. So we look for naturally the electricity, the power that we need for operating our vehicles. It has to come from sustainable sources, renewable sources. Of course, to the extent possible, there are still lots of places in Europe where getting renewable energy is not as easy. Here in the Nordics, it's relatively easy, although it does fluctuate throughout the day. But this is something we are always working with our suppliers on. Same goes for our suppliers in general. Obviously, one of the biggest assets that we are purchasing are our cars. And this has inflation as well, where we are looking at buying new cars. who is the supplier, and Renault that we are currently working with actually has a big focus on ensuring that the cars are able to be recycled, but also that they are using recycled parts in their production. So the Zoe we use today, it's roughly 96% reusable, which means that the seats are now made by old seat belts and so on. So there's a lot of small things that they go through, and it's important in our business as well. And when we look at our business, naturally there are things that happens during normal procedure. We have damages to the cars. We change a lot of tires. I think this is natural when you have almost 1,000 cars. There will be a wear and tear. Also here we look very much into how can we do this in a sustainable way. So as an example, the tires, if we have a puncture or something like that, we go through a lot of tires every year. So these are actually reused both at a technical school where they use it for working with, but we also donate them to a go-kart track where they use them as boundaries when you go around around the track. So instead of just wasting them, they can be put to good use, which I think is super important. The same goes for auto parts. It does happen that some of our vehicles are damaged, and we can actually reuse parts from the damaged vehicles for future damages. So all the parts that we can reuse are reused. So again, as little waste as possible in our business as well. Then I think from some of the details of our company, maybe a little higher perspective, where we look at the green agenda in total. And this is something that's very close to our heart as well. We are constantly working on how can we add to this, how can we participate in promoting the green agenda. And it is something that's truly important, not only to our society, but it's also gaining increased awareness from investors, from society in general. And I think companies that have this as an integrated part of their business will be the winners in the future, and most others will have to catch up eventually, which is going to be a much harder journey, I think. Some of the trends we are seeing is that ESG performance, ESG reporting is becoming increasingly more important. We see it from our investors. They are challenging us on this. Luckily, we're able to report quite well on this, but we see it from their push on other companies as well. Green investment in general, I think there's not a day that goes by without being able to see in the news that now there are new funds for green investments, or cities are pushing for this and this. So it is very high trending topic at the moment. I think we should expect that it will continue in the coming years as well. And then interestingly enough, when we look at pension funds and other portfolio managers, then typically having green elements in their green companies in their investment portfolio has become much more important today. They are removing all gun manufacturers, tobacco companies, and all these things, and increasing green investments. And obviously, this is an area where green mobility fits very well, and we can hopefully add value to their portfolio as well. Another perspective I think will become increasingly important as well is how do we benchmark companies? How do we ensure that the benchmark is done on the proper terms? So I could argue that we save 10,000 tons of CO2, but it can become very difficult to actually verify this. For us, it's very simple. We actually give all the data, provide data for so you can actually verify this. But when you start seeing larger companies, how do we ensure that the benchmarks are the right ones and it is actually transparent? That becomes a challenge in the future, and I think where we have traditionally today, we have various KPIs where we can more easily compare large companies to small companies. we also need to find out what should be the KPIs on ESG and sustainability in general. Green mobility as a company, this is something, as I said, it's very close to our heart here. One of the things that is most easy to report on is the CO2 savings that we're doing. It is a term that most people know. We don't necessarily know exactly what it means, but it's a term that is very frequently used, and that's something that we have, at least we have a sense of understanding of. In Green Mobility's business, so far we've saved more than 2,200 tons of CO2. And the way we measure it is that we compare all our trips, so the kilometers driven, to if the same trips had been done in traditional cars. EU provides on a yearly basis an average emission rate per car, both for diesel and gasoline cars, and this way we're able to calculate the CO2 levels that we're actually saving, and thus also report on it ongoingly. Similar for our CO2 savings, we work on a number of things. I'll go a little bit into detail on these in the coming slides. But I think we also need to look at how can we relate this into something that everyone understands. 2,000 tons of CO2 is nice, but most people don't really know what it means. So how can we sort of drill that down to something we all understand? Having an average trip in Green Mobility is about a kilo of CO2 saved. And then again, what is a kilo of CO2 is not something you can carry around, but it's the similar, I think, to what 3 cups of coffee actually emit. So if you take a Green Mobility to your local cafe, then you've actually made a CO2 neutral trip. So I think putting it in a more ordinary day perspective is something that helps us understand where we can all participate in impacting this. Green Mobility works naturally. Besides our ESG, we work also with supporting UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have active programs and measures put in place for a number of the goals. Here you see some examples we have in our ESG report that was publicized a couple of weeks ago. We go into much more detail on these. What are we doing? How do we measure it? And what has been the development in the past year of these? This is about working with companies. How can we help companies save CO2? How can we help them have more sustainable mobility? So we have specific programs for this. Obviously, having in general urban mobility patterns. This is about saving CO2, but it's also the impact we make on noise, parking, and so on. If we look to a bit further, we also engage in the infrastructure that is needed to have not only shared mobility, but naturally also electric mobility. So we work with our charging partners, helping them to determine the right places to have charging capabilities, which again then helps private citizens who also own EVs. So constantly having this. And as I said in the beginning, the private car reduction is a critical thing for most companies. We actually measure this. We know today that for every car we put on the street, a little more than 4 private cars are reduced or removed from the street. And this is directly related to people actually selling their cars. Something that we ask our customer on regular basis. Last part about safer driving. Well, it is something that is a bit more tricky to actually measure, but it goes into how we engage our customers, how we work with society in the different cities we're in. Always having a close relation with both the city, but also the police. It's not, of course, in our interest that people are having unsafe driving in our cars, whether it goes for alcohol, damages, speeding, and so on. So a continuous cooperation on this to ensure that the cities we operate are even safer for driving. a big part of when we look at ESG and sustainability, we obviously have E for environment, we have S for social, and then we have G for governance. And naturally, this is a part of our business as well, to make sure that we have a responsible business conduct in everything that we do. We have an ongoing measuring and dialogue, obviously, with all our employees to look at satisfaction, health, retention rate. While we do have a lot of great employees, we also know that the company is more stronger if we're able to have them longer with us. As I mentioned earlier as well, we work closely with all our suppliers. We asked them to sign a code of conduct to make sure that we see eye to eye on how we work, how we treat our employees, how do we conduct ourselves as a business. Lastly, on our board, this is something we are very open about, and also something that we report on as per legislation, all the governance around our board and the rest of the company. From our recently published ESG report, I've taken this snapshot. There are a lot more details in the report, so I encourage you to have a look at it. It is available at our website. But here you see some of the measures that we focus on the environmental side. Obviously, avoided emissions is the big one. The kilowatt related to our energy consumptions, employees, and I think here is especially also diversity, and not only between genders but also between nationalities. Today we have 12 nationalities working in green mobility. And I think this is equally important, that we have a diversity in everyone that works here.